who is here tonight. Excellent, excellent. Well, I know there'll be a lot of people who want to watch this later because they're watching a UVA ball game right about now. So we'll have them back, and you folks will be delighted to have you watch later. I'm Fran Ferguson. I'm the director of this museum, and delighted today to have Nelson Harris with us. He is pastor extraordinaire of Heights Church, and just a wonderful friend to this organization. And he has spent 6 years putting together this book that he's going to talk to us about. Put in so much time and effort, and it's going to be the Bible of the 40s for the Roanoke Valley for sure, our go-to. So I'm delighted that you all could be here, and I think I could say nice words about you all night long, but I think I'll turn it over to you, Nelson.
All right.
You can fill in the gaps.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Well, it is a pleasure, excuse me, to be here, and I appreciate Fran's invitation. Let me just say that I've been a longtime member here of the Salem Museum, and projects like this would not happen if it weren't for museums, local, and their archives, and their staff, and their volunteers. So I always want to acknowledge that. Let me just say a brief word about the book itself and kind of how it came to be, and then I'll say a few things about the 40s, and then we're going to look at some really interesting, I hope for you, archival images from the decade. The book was funded by the Roanoke Public Library Foundation. And so I always like to begin there, because if it were not for the Library Foundation, this book would not have come into being. And really what I set out to do was, if you are familiar with books on local history, you know Raymond Barnes's book on the history of the city of Roanoke is kind of on most people's bookshelves if you're into local history. Well, he ends at 1940. And so I had made a proposal to the folks at the Library Foundation, could we bring that forward? And but I didn't want to just do the city of Roanoke. I wanted it to be Roanoke Valley. So I wanted to take in Salem and Benton and Roanoke County and any other areas that were kind of just right outside of those parameters. So what I did was I used the microfilm of the Roanoke Times and literally went through every edition of the Roanoke Times from January 1st, 1940 until January 1st, 1950. And so yeah, so it was a lot of this. It was a lot of this, and also used did about 7,000 searches on African-American newspapers, primarily the Roanoke Tribune, which is much of it has been digitized and online, because the Roanoke Times in the 1940s, while it did some coverage of African-American events and things that were going on in the Roanoke Valley, it didn't do a lot. And so I wanted to make sure that that it was as complete a history as I could make it. So what you end up with is about a 650-page book. It's got 300 archival images in it that I think add to and make it a little bit more interesting. And I am working on the Roanoke Valley in the 1950s, which will be the exact same format and publisher and everything, and hopefully that will be out this time next year. I'm in June of 1959 of the microfilm scrolling, so so I'm close. In fact, I was just here Saturday scanning images that folks brought in from the 1950s. So let me just say to you, if you have any images from the 1950s pertaining to the Roanoke Valley, please let Fran know or let me know, because they could certainly be possibly included in the book. All right. Well, let me just say a little word about the 40s, just kind of some highlights of what was going on in the Roanoke Valley during that decade, and then we're going to get into some images. The 40s obviously heavily impacted by World War II, but just some amazing things happened. The Boston Red Sox, and I'll start with sports. Boston Red Sox and the Cincinnati Reds came on a number of occasions and did exhibition baseball games. Jack Dempsey came. The Detroit Lions and the Pittsburgh Steelers played an exhibition football game at Victory Stadium. Joe Louis came to town on a number of occasions for a variety of reasons. Byron Nelson and Sam Snead played an exhibition golf match. Here, Jesse Owens came to the Roanoke area on 3 different occasions in the 1940s. And the reason he came, it's impossible to think that this would in any way be the case today with an athlete of that standing. But he would come with the teams from the Negro League Baseball. And he would kind of help them draw a crowd, but he would also do some things that would help him earn income. And so he would race a horse, for example. He would invite all the best high school track athletes from Andrew Lewis and Jefferson and Addison and Carver, wherever, to race him at a local high school track. And so they'd go a couple laps around the track, but he would do it while jumping hurdles, and he won every time. But Jesse Owens came, and then whenever he would come, he would always go to Carver or Addison and speak to the student body there and sign autographs and that kind of thing. But it would be hard to imagine an Olympic gold medalist having to race horses today just to make a living. So, but Jesse Owens came. If you're into tennis, Frank Kovacs, Don Budge, Bobby Riggs all came and did exhibition tennis matches. In theater, Tallulah Bankhead came. The original cast of Porgy and Bess from New York came and did about a two-week run at the Academy of Music. Ethel Barrymore, Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, Jeanette MacDonald, and the high mark of serious drama, the Three Stooges came and gave performances. We also had intellectuals that would come and do lectures, and of course we have to bear in mind that this is pre-television, so events like this would draw literally thousands of people to come. And so W.E.B. Du Bois, Henry Sloane Coffin, the journalist Edward R. Murrow came, theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, Norman Vincent Peale, Adam Clayton Powell, and so a lot of those kind of luminaries in politics or religion or journalism would come and give lectures on current events, and these were rather large events. We also had the burgeoning of the civil rights movement in the Roanoke Valley. And so in 1941, a domestic worker by the name of Sarah Craig refused to move to the back of the bus in the city of Roanoke. And so she was fined $50. And, $50 may not sound like a lot, but to a domestic worker in 1941, that would easily have been probably 2 or 3 weeks worth of wage. Thurgood Marshall came to Roanoke. He at that time was an attorney with the NAACP, and he came and announced that the NAACP would begin filing civil rights litigation against schools and universities being for whites only. The first target ended up being the University of Virginia. There was also in both Roanoke County, and of course Salem was a part of Roanoke County at that time, there was an effort by Black teachers to have equal pay. as white teachers. They were paid about a third less than their white counterparts. We had, for the first time in Roanoke County and in Roanoke City, blacks able to serve on juries, which had not happened before. We also had the first black election officials, the first black policemen. We had legal challenges to the poll tax, although they did not prevail in them at the time. And we also had a number of folks, and I'll have their pictures here in just a moment, but Harry Penn, who was a dentist in Roanoke, was appointed to the Roanoke School Board, and he was the first black ever appointed to a school board in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We had the Hunting Life-Saving Crew, and we'll see a picture of them here in just a moment. And they were the first all African-American volunteer rescue squad in the United States. And for those of you that are familiar with the volunteer rescue squad movement, I mean, the Roanoke Valley really kind of has a prominent place because the Roanoke Life-Saving First Aid Crew was the first all volunteer rescue squad ever in the United States, and the Hunting crew then after them. And then we also had a gentleman by the name of Edward Dudley, who was an attorney here that grew up in Roanoke. He went on to practice law, but he also served with the State Department. And Edward Dudley became the first black ambassador in the history of the United States. And so the first person to achieve that rank. Some more localized events. Carbons Cove came online during the 40s. It was the largest municipal project in Western Virginia. And it was interesting because that was being constructed during World War II, and German POWs were used for much of the work in creation of Carbons Cove. We had two German POW camps here in Roanoke at the time. One was over in the Catawba area, and one was here in Salem. And we'll see a couple pictures of those. Woodrum Field went through a major overhaul and expansion during the 40s. And the only reason that happened was that it was declared a national defense project. During World War II, you really couldn't do much because of rationing. And so any kind of construction, new construction and expansion just didn't happen during World War II because of the rationing of material for the war effort. And but Woodrum Field managed to qualify as a national defense project. The interesting thing about Woodrum Field is it had more activity than the airports in Washington, Philadelphia, and New York combined. And the reason, and most people, you're a little floored by that. The reason for that is really three or four things. Number one, we of course had just regular car freight and passenger service that was occurring. But we also had a Naval Air Cadet training program here in Roanoke. The ground school was at Roanoke College, and the flight school was at Woodrum Field. And then Woodrum Field was also used for a ferry station for planes that needed to move from the East Coast to the West Coast. And so Woodrum Field became a primary location for them to fly in, refuel, pilots to stay overnight before they made the trip out to the West Coast. So you put all of those together, that equates to a heavy amount of activity, flight activity at Woodrum Field. In fact, on one day, and I can't remember the day, in 1943, Woodrum Field was the busiest airport in the world on that particular day. We also had 1949, the Star on Mill Mountain got lit. We had the end of streetcars, the advent, however, of drive-in theaters. We had first television reception in the late 40s here in the Roanoke Valley. If you're a railroad buff, you know that in the 40s was the advent of J-class locomotives coming out of the Roanoke shops and the debut of the Powhatan Arrow as a passenger train. We also had during the 40s the centennial celebrations of both Hollins College and Roanoke College. Carver School here in Salem was built and opened during that decade. We also had the onset of polio. Interestingly, when I was growing up, the hospital, we always called it Roanoke Memorial Hospital. However, prior to it being called Roanoke Memorial Hospital, it was Roanoke Memorial and Crippled Children's Hospital. That was the actual formal name of the hospital. Because that hospital, as were some other hospitals in this area, were really the epicenter for care for people, children, mostly afflicted by polio. If you know anything about polio or that epidemic at that time, the Wytheville had the most polio cases per capita than any other locality in the nation. And so many of the cases from Wytheville, Wythe County, Southwest Virginia came to Roanoke for treatment. And so what's today Carilion, what we grew up with as Roanoke Memorial Hospital, was the hospital, the treatment center for polio victims in Western Virginia. We also had veterans coming to the VA hospital following during World War II and following World War II, and many suffering what was called shell shock. We now know PTSD. And it was really interesting because in the paper, the medical doctors, the medical faculty at the Veterans Hospital would often give presentations, to Kiwanis Club, Lions Club, about the work there at the Veterans Hospital and the treatment of men that were there. And they would often describe like lobotomies and this kind of thing, which was kind of not what would be done today. We had the closing of the Academy of Music. We had very interesting proposals about what to do with Elmwood Park and Mill Mountain, and I'll end with those here in just a moment. And then we had the post-World War II boom in construction. I mean, if you just think for about 4 years, right, nobody could build, nobody could renovate, nobody could expand, you couldn't do anything as a municipality, you couldn't do anything as a business. Well, come 1946, boom. I mean, all kinds of things happened. So in here in Salem and in downtown Roanoke, businesses started expanding and completely, reinventing themselves in terms of their stores. So there were all of these, really through the late 40s, all of these grand reopenings of stores that really had been in existence for a long time, but now they were doing something new. And so you would often read about those grand reopenings. And just to give you a flavor of how popular these things were, Fink's Jewelers had a grand reopening of their expanded new store in downtown Roanoke. And on a Friday night, 15,000 people showed up for that event. During World War II, we meaning law enforcement here, asked all persons of Japanese descent to register with them, and they had to turn in any weaponry that they had. So if they had a hunting rifle or a knife or anything of that had to be submitted to the local police department, or in the county's case, to the sheriff's department. We also had, following World War II, which was pretty common in communities around the United States, the display of war trophies. So Hermann Goering's personal effects came through and were on display here in Roanoke for about a week. We had a kamikaze sub that had been captured, and that was brought in and was displayed for about a week or so. And sometimes these were very humorous things. Because of rationing, clothing material, textiles were rationed. And so it really had an impact on fashion. I learned a lot during this thing. So it had an impact on fashion. So for example, men's suits, you could not have a cuff on the suit because that was kind of a waste of material. So you could not have a three-piece suit, because the vest was not necessary. It was just, kind of an extra. The hemlines on women's dresses went from below the knee to above the knee because it saved material. So following World War II, major employers like the railway and stores and businesses set forth the kind of the standard that now that the war was over and we could kind of go back to what was, the hemline on women's dresses was to be lowered. And so there was a protest, and I'm not making this up, I'm not stretching this. There was a protest in downtown Roanoke by the Below the Knee Club that said, we want to keep the dresses, the hemlines, above the knee. And so they kind of made fun of it, but they won. So all the businesses, kind of reined that back in. And so needless to say, when the women had their parade through downtown Roanoke, some wearing, now remember this is the late 40s, some wearing bikinis to really protest the whole thing. Would just say that the 90% male attendees that were in the thousands that day. But anyway, so sometimes it was kind of humorous. We had the first female police officer. And then we had Fashion Week, both here in Salem and in downtown Roanoke. Now, the interesting thing about Fashion Week is that in the display windows of the stores, that were live models, so not mannequins, but live models, and so they would switch out, and of course they were displaying the latest fashions, and a huge contest on who had the best when the display is and all of it. This was huge, Fashion Week in Salem and in Roanoke. One last thing, and then we'll look at some photos for entertainment. I was just amazed at the entertainers that came through Roanoke. Now, keep in mind, Roanoke in the 40s was the third largest city in Virginia. We were only below Richmond and Norfolk, so we were number 3. And Roanoke was a pretty popular stop between Washington, D.C. for entertainers, and then typically Greensboro and folks south of us. But anyway, if you had been in Roanoke in the 1940s, these were the folks that came through. Roy Acuff, Louis Armstrong, Eddie Arnold, Gene Autry, Count Basie, Leonard Bernstein, who was in his 20s at the time with the Pittsburgh Symphony, Victor Borg, a fair amount, Cab Calloway, Nat King Cole, Tommy Dorsey, Ella Fitzgerald, Dizzy Gillespie, Benny Goodman, Lionel Hampton, Woody Herman, Billie Holiday, the Ink Spots, Harry James, Guy Lombardo, Glenn Miller, Bill Monroe, the Nicholas Brothers, Minnie Pearl, Bill Bojangles Robinson, Roy Rogers, Artie Shaw, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the Von Trapp family singers, yes, the one from Sound of Music, Ernest Tubb and Fats Waller. Now, out of the list I just gave you, I went to my index and I thought, wonder who came through most, because most of these people came through numerous times during the 40s. And so the entertainer on that list that came through more than anybody else was Minnie Pearl. And Minnie Pearl would come because the Grand Ole Opry would come to the Roanoke Theater, which was a movie house. They would come to the Roanoke Theater on Wednesday nights. And Minnie Pearl was almost always the MC, the host of the Grand Ole Opry show, and so they would come through and do their thing at the Roanoke Theater on Wednesday nights. Now during the 50s, Hank Snow came through. He was pretty, he would come through. And so what they would do, if you'd look at an ad, there'd be the headliner, the marquee, right? So Hank Snow, he was a marquee personality, you know, and he was Grand Ole Opry. Then you'd see the lesser known people would kind of be in smaller print, you know, on the list kind of towards the bottom of the ad. So anyway, so I'm scrolling. So there's Hank Snow. So of course, you know, it makes it into the book just like these other made it in the 40s books. So I always list all the lesser known stars because sometimes the lesser known stars become the bigger stars later on, right? So anyways, Hank Snow. So, you know, then there's 2 or 3 or 4 other, you know, country music entertainers that, you know, so on and so forth. Last name, smallest print on the list of people he's bringing with him was Elvis Presley. And he was where you make country music. Well, he was with the Louisiana Hayride. You know, that's how he got his start. So interestingly, now this is the 50s, so I've jumped ahead. Anyway, Little League Baseball was just getting started in the 50s in an organized way. And so the folks that were involved in that asked Hank Snow, would he come and do a benefit concert to raise money for Little League Baseball in the Roanoke Valley. And of course, he would get paid, but you know, they'd make the profit from it. So anyway, so Hank Snow agreed. So they asked, could you bring Elvis Presley with you? Because he was the hit of the Hank Snow show. And Hank Snow did. So we can honestly say there was a Little League Baseball fundraiser that got Elvis Presley to come to Roanoke and do that. All right. Well, let's we're gonna look at some photos, and I've just kind of put together a variety of things, and so one of the things that I did, which I'm doing for the 50s book, is I have invited folks, members of the public, to come and to bring any photos or images that they might have that we could get used in the book, as well as using the wonderful archives, for example, here at the Salem Museum or Link or whatever. And all right. Let me go down here. We may have to get Alex. We may have to get Alex. It's not forwarding. But some of the best or the most interesting photos would often come from folks who would bring something in, because typically it's something that hadn't been published before, hadn't been used before, and so it was unique and that kind of thing. So really, a couple of the images that I'm going to start with came from a guy who did just that. There we go. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alex. So here we have the explosion of a junior grocery on Franklin Road, and it happened on June 22nd, 1946. And the junior grocery on Franklin Road had a huge display window. And so they had displayed, because 4th of July is getting ready to come in a couple of weeks. So they just had this amazing fireworks display in the window of, you know, what was for sale in their little grocery. And so there was a little crack in the window, in the corner of the window. And so a guy thought he'd have a little fun, and so he lit a match and stuck it in there to light what he thought would be like, you know, one firework, and it'd pop, and you know, he had his fun. Well, what happened was that you could see the entire display went up. And so this is the aftermath of the explosion at Junior Grocery. There were 5 people in the grocery store at the time that it happened. Fortunately, nobody got seriously injured, though 2 or 3 did end up going to the hospital. But I had this 93-year-old man who walked in at the Benton Museum with this photo, and went the wrong way. And this one, and he said, "Let me tell you about the explosion." So you know, you get some images like this, and it really, and I had it. I was in my book, so I knew what he was talking about, but nobody had shown me ever any images of it, and there were none in any of the archives.
Where's on Franklin Road? Where's that at?
It was down near where the Paul Federal Building is today, that little block of Franklin Road. In fact, I don't know that you can see one of these pictures, but it blew out. You all remember Lee Junior High School used to be down there? It blew out the windows at Lee Junior High School. Yes, ma'am.
My grandfather put the windows back in.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. He was a carpenter
Uh-huh.
for the Roanoke City Schools.
Yeah.
And my aunt just told me this story not too long ago.
Yeah.
She's 92, so she remembers.
Okay. Neat. Neat. Here is an aerial view of Roanoke Airport in 1941. A little different from what we see today. But I wanted to put that one in because in just a moment you'll see the more expanded Woodrum Field, and a couple things just to point out. There was no night flying at this time. And so the little airports would have to write the name on the top of the building so the pilots could know that they were, coming in at the right place. And if any of you have ever seen any old pictures of downtown, you know that the Market Building used to have Roanoke in big white letters with an arrow, and that was a sign, and the arrow was directing a pilot to where the direction of the airport. Then there's this is Benton in the early 1940s. October 13th, 1941, the Roanoke Municipal Airport officially became Woodrum Field. And I did an aviation book with a guy named Marshall Harris, and this is the picture we chose for the cover of it, because there's a number of things that are kind of happening in this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. First of all, you see the airport hangar in the back. Then you see the nose of the American Airlines on it, and it actually has Roanoke written on it. And so the airlines took great pride in whatever community they served, that they would name at least one plane for that community. And in the 1940s, Roanoke was served by American Airlines, Eastern Airlines, and Piedmont Airlines for passenger service. You also see some military personnel here, which kind of again represents the heavy military activity that's going on at Woodrum Field at that time. And on that day, American Airlines reestablished passenger and cargo service into Roanoke. Here's just another image of Woodrum Field. This is 1946, a little bit after World War II. Just want to point out a couple things. Just this was the airport control tower. This was the old Canada farmhouse. The airport was actually put on the Canada farm. And the first, I'm not making this up, the first airport control tower was a little 12 by 12 box on the roof of the farmhouse. And you actually would have to go out an upstairs window. You get out on a little ladder and you go out, and then you get in the 12 by 12 box. And that's where the airport control tower was. Here are the pilot cadets in front of a C-47 at Woodrum Field in 44. Excuse me. All of these guys would have been doing their ground school at Roanoke College. The officers, by the way, stayed at Hotel Roanoke, and the Pine Room down there was an officers' club during World War II. So that the instructors and all stayed there, but that's one of many classes that came through Woodrum Field during World War II. A lot of people don't know this, but Roanoker Lewis Johnson served as our Secretary of Defense, and here he is being sworn in to that position on March 28, 49. He did not serve long. He only served about a year and a half as the Secretary of Defense. One of the things that he is credited with, however, is establishing the Air Force Academy. That was kind of his idea, and so he's given him credit for that. Here's the old Roanoke Auditorium in the early 40s. This was kind of the civic center of its day. It sat down near the Hotel Roanoke. It was later purchased by the American Legion after World War II, and so a lot of older generations remember it as the American Legion Auditorium. It burned in 1957, but all of the folks that I listed off just a moment ago, this would have been the venue that they would have performed at. Thanksgiving Day game between DPI and VMI at Victory Stadium in 1942. Of course, a huge annual event. Here's the Elks annual picnic at Rockledge Inn on Mill Mountain in September of 41. And for those of you that are familiar with Mill Mountain Theater, you know this is where they originally held their performances, and that burned as well. We had a number of actors, radio personalities, singers that came through Roanoke, not necessarily to perform, but as part of war bond rallies. And so here's Greer Garson at such an event at Victory Stadium. And of course, these were huge events where these stars would come in to encourage people to buy war bonds. Here is a perfect example of post-World War II boon in remodeling, expansion, and construction. So you have the Smartwear Irving Sachs store in Roanoke, which has been around for a long time, but now they're new. And so this is the exterior, and that was the interior. And whenever I would read about these department stores, you know, and they're new, you know, they're reopening, and all of that, and the amenities that they would have, you get tickled a little bit because, you know, they would advertise as an amenity for their female customers a women's only phone lounge. And so they'd have these models sitting around on these couches, you know, talking on the phone and looking at magazines and, you know, and this kind of thing. But this was very sleek, right, for the late 40s. The whole idea of the curved counter and curved display areas. But it's just one example of such a thing. Here's an aerial view of Hotel Roanoke, and the American Legion Auditorium that we saw just a moment ago is sitting right there. And so this would have been the NW passenger station down at Lake Museum. Of course, when that went away in 57, then that's parking today. Soapbox Derby was huge in the 40s and even into the 50s. It used to run on what is Crystal Spring Avenue in South Roanoke, and 15 to 20,000 people would attend the Soapbox Derby. And so you can imagine, you know, if your front yard is on Crystal Spring Avenue, having, you know, 17,000 people come over there is not, you know, what you're really interested in. So it ultimately moved to what became the Roanoke drag strip over in the Starkey area in the 50s because people complained. But if you won the Soapbox Derby, then you got to compete in the National Derby, which I think was in Akron, Ohio, and just to give you a flavor of how things were different, the winner of the Roanoke Soapbox Derby, which would be boys from Roanoke City, Roanoke County, you know, Salem, whatever. I mean, they would be given free air flight to Akron, Ohio, and Roanoke Times would show up and take their picture with the pilot, and they'd have a big banner, you know, wishing Billy well, and, you know, and so on. Just huge kind of thing. Here is Edward Dudley's. Of course, it's not a very good picture, but again, he grew up in Roanoke, grew up on Gilmer Avenue, and his father was a dentist over in the Gainesboro area. He actually grew up next door to Oliver Hill. So it's kind of fascinating that these two really kind of icons in American Black history were literally next door to each other. Oliver Hill's house is 401 Gilmer. The Dudley's home was 405 Gilmer Avenue. And it's really interesting about this story. When he got appointed, when he was serving with the State Department, he got appointed by President Harry Truman to be America's emissary to Liberia, and which having Black men serve as emissary to Liberia had been kind of standard procedure a little bit. Well, America's diplomatic relations with Liberia got upgraded while Dudley was there, which meant because the relationship got upgraded, you didn't have an emissary anymore, you had an ambassador. So there was discussion in the Truman White House about, do we want Edward Dudley being Ambassador Edward Dudley, or do we want to switch him out with what was often described about the State Department then, pale, male, and Yale. And he was none of the three. And so if you know anything about Truman, you know that Truman was probably, one of the first kind of guys to really kind of push the envelope on civil rights. And so Truman made the decision, no, we will keep Edward Dudley and he will rise to the rank of ambassador. And he did. And thus he becomes America's first Black ambassador. Here's the intersection of Walden Avenue and Jefferson Street, 1948. This is the last year for the streetcars in Roanoke. Simply, they just got replaced by buses. And the thing to note about streetcars, I know that we tend to kind of have a little bit of romanticism around the streetcar, but they were really quite dangerous. Even in the 40s, people would step off a streetcar and not make it quite all the way off, or a lady's purse might get hung and the streetcar begins to move and she'd get drugged. And so people got injured. They died under the wheels of streetcar. Interestingly, as a side note, it's not happened in the 40s, but happened back, I believe it was in the 20s. There was one guy that actually served as the mayor of Salem, and then a few years thereafter served as the mayor of Roanoke. It's only happened one time. He got run over by a streetcar. He stepped off the curb. He did not hear the streetcar coming, and they didn't have a really good brake system and streetcar. So anyway, but that was the last year for the streetcar, 48. Here's Main Street in Salem in the 1940s. There's the post office. Here's a lobby of the Hotel Roanoke, and I say with summer furniture in 1943. The hotel would switch out its lobby furniture depending on the season. So in the summertime, you had the wicker look going here, and then in the wintertime, the heavy overstuffed leather would come out. So anyway, so here's the lobby with the summer furniture. The Hotel Roanoke went through a major renovation and expansion after World War II. One of those ended up being what they called the Fountain Room. And the Fountain Room was supposed to be kind of a hangout for older high school students, college students. So they kind of tried to create a little bit of a vibe with it that would be attractive to that. It didn't last that long. The Fountain Room went away in the kind of the early 50s, but anyway, it was part of their post-World War II expansion. Here we have some of the work that's going on out at Carbons Cove with the basin construction in 45. Again, that's much of it had happened during World War II. Water went over the dam at Carbons Cove a few days before this picture was taken. I think it went over the dam on May the 17th of 46. Interestingly, Carbons Cove had a little bit of controversy surrounding it because there were a couple people on Roanoke City Council that did not think the basin would hold water. They just didn't think the water would ever reach high enough to actually go over the spillway. No matter how many engineers came down from Blacksburg to, say, no, it'll do it. I don't know how many of you saw the Tucker car movie. Okay, so the Tucker car, here is the Tucker car on display in the Hardware Irving Sachs store in Roanoke in 48. It didn't last long, the Tucker Car Company. And the interesting thing about the Tucker car was that the engine, transmission, and all of that was in the trunk, and the trunk was under the hood. So it was kind of flipped. And anyway, it was one guy that had a Tucker car dealership in Roanoke, and he had one car. And so what you would do is, if you wanted the Tucker car, you would go in and you could, test drive that one and whatnot. But you didn't get that one. He would then order you one, and then it would ship to Roanoke. So anyway, just a little auto trivia there. Here we have South Jefferson Street looking north. The Elmwood Diner. You can see that just poking out right here is there on the right. Here's Dr. Harry Penn, who was the first African-American appointed to the Roanoke School Board, really the first African-American appointed to any school board in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Jesse Owens signing autographs at Carver School here in Salem in 1940. The N&W passenger station, again, that went, if any of you are familiar with all of that, that went through redesign via Raymond Loewy following World War II. And so here's the kind of the modern look of the passenger station. Hotel Roanoke in 1940. So this is pre its renovation and expansion. Here's the Academy of Music in 1943. And this really was the optimal venue for entertainers. The problem was that it ultimately became a fire hazard. And so a lot of people say, oh, wonder why they took it down, wonder why, and so on and so forth. Well, what happened was the fire marshal basically said, nobody can sit on the upper balcony, because if a fire breaks out, they have no escape. And then he said, a year or two later, nobody can sit on the lower balcony. Same reason. And at this point, the Academy of Music is in such a deteriorating condition that bricks are actually falling off the facade of it onto the street. And so at this point, the building commissioner steps in and deems it uninhabitable. And so then there was a decision: do we rehab it, or do we just take it down? And because of all the fire issues and whatnot, and code violations that it had, it ultimately comes down. But anyway, it was a premier venue. Trying to think of. I'm trying to locate it today. It would have been on Salem. Trying to think of what would be there and what's there today. But anyway, it was on Salem Avenue. Victor Borg was given a performance there one time, and the lights went out. And so he kept performing. And he had a cigarette lighter in his pocket. He pulled out the cigarette lighter and lit it, and put it up to his face and looked out to the audience and said, "Oh, there you are." So anyway, keep it with him. Here's Appalachian Power Demonstration Band. What is this lady doing, and why is this band? A lot of women didn't trust electric kitchens. They just didn't trust it. And so Appalachian Power would send these ladies out with all kinds of, electronic toasters and mixers and all kinds of things. And they would pull up in a neighborhood and everything would kind of be plugged into a big battery in their demonstration van, and ladies would come out and watch the Appalachian Power demonstration lady say, here's what you can't have in your kitchen. So that's what she's doing. Here we have the American Viscose Rescue Squad in the World War II Victory Parade in downtown Roanoke on August 15, 1945. Just real quick on that. As you know, we had to have two victories, right? So first victory was over Germany when Germany surrendered, but the war wasn't over because we still had to have victory over Japan. So the victory parades didn't happen when Germany surrendered because we were still at war. And the deal was nobody knew when the war was going to end, right? So how do you plan for these big parades and all? And so the deal was that whenever Japan surrendered, whatever day that was, 3 days later would be the victory parade. And so almost every community just had that as their standard kind of operating procedure on when they would do their big victory celebration. So this is here in Roanoke. Star on Mill Mountain was lit on Thanksgiving Eve of 1949. It was meant to be temporary. They were just going to put it up to draw people to downtown Roanoke Valley for Christmas shopping. And then it was going to come down. And as you know, that did not happen. Monroe Junior High School in the late 40s, this became the first new school in Roanoke in a quarter century, and again, part of the post-World War II boom in construction. Carver School basketball championship team in 44. I tried to put in some sports images throughout the book. Dr. Downing and the staff at Burrell Memorial Hospital, which was the African-American hospital because none of the other hospitals would treat Black patients in the 40s. Burrell Memorial Hospital had a 17-county service region, so they were, pretty prominent. Here is the Hunting life-saving and first aid crew. Now, this is not from the 40s. You can look at the vehicle and figure that out. It's probably from the early 60s, but it's a great image of them. And again, they were organized on December 21st, 1941. They were organized about 2 weeks after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, which is when a lot of life-saving and first aid crews were organized in the United States. The idea being that, we may get attacked. And if we get attacked, are we prepared to render emergency aid to those that would be impacted? So a ton of life-saving crews came into being in December of 41 and January of 42, with the kind of shocking, the psychological shock that America can be attacked. This is not a European or Pacific thing. The remodeled interior of the N&W passenger station, and this shot's from 1949. Here we have the debut run of the Powhatan Arrow as she leaves downtown Roanoke in April of 46. I mean, thousands lined the track, went from Norfolk to Cincinnati, and so these scenes were all up and down the run of the Powhatan Arrow. This is I put this in the book, kind of an interesting ad, World War II ad in the N&W magazine. Loose lips sink ships, gossip vain can wreck a train. The idea being that the N&W was transporting a lot of military personnel and a lot of material for the military. And so this was not to be openly broadcast, some of the things that they were doing. Here we have the Roanoke Auditorium. The Treasury Secretary, Henry Morgenthau, is speaking again at a war bonds rally. So another, number of those that occur. Here we have remains of a soldier being taken from an N&W baggage car, but notice the date on it. It's November 1947. And what happened, and many of you know this, is that an American soldier would be killed in Europe, or over in the Pacific, and they would be interred there. And then after the war, they were disinterred, and their remains then came back to their home communities for burial. So in 47, and 48 and even into 49, the remains of America's military men were still coming home. And in our case, coming home to Salem, coming home to Roanoke for burial here, having been disinterred from cemeteries over in Europe or in the Pacific. I just put this one in because I think it's so like retro. The employees of the Crest Company lunch counter, June 49, you know, the little uniforms and all that kind of stuff. Here we have an aerial view of Elmwood Park in 1940, and this would have been the library at that time. Yeah. Here's Firemen's Convention Parade in Salem in August of 48. So I tried to always, anytime there's kind of a good street scene or something like that, I would try to include that as well. The old N&W station at Salem in the 40s. Benton War Memorial, this is from the early 50s, but Benton was actually the first community to erect a war memorial in the state, and it was the Benton War Memorial. A lot of communities, including Roanoke, couldn't decide on what they wanted to do, and we'll end with that here in just a moment. Now, here's the caretaker's home on Mill Mountain. It's not a whole lot to look at, and so you may say, well, why is this picture even in the book? Why is it on your PowerPoint tonight? Because this was the location for the first television reception in the Roanoke Valley. There was an engineer, and he had gotten a television set down in North Carolina, and he brought it to the Roanoke area and was bound to determine he was going to get TV reception, even though, of course, we didn't have a TV station here at that time, honestly. So he tried 2 or 3 different spots and just got nothing. So on a Friday night, the man put the TV set in his car. He drove up to Mill Mountain for obvious reasons, knocked on the door of the caretaker's house. The gentleman came to the door. He and his wife were having dinner, and he explained to him what he wanted to do. And so they plugged the TV in. The TV was on the front porch, and lo and behold, the boxing match from Madison Square Gardens came on. And so anyway, that little anecdote's in the book, but that's where TV was first viewed in Roanoke. Here we have Roy Kinsey, John Payne, Bob Kinsey on the day the Roanoke Star was lit. Many of you know, of course, John Payne, went on to, many to big time Hollywood. Grew up in this area. Here's a German POW camp at Catawba in 1944. And another image of it there. I'll go back to this one, but you may look at it and say, well, gee, man, they got a tennis court, they got a basketball goal. This is living right. Well, it was a CCC camp prior to it being a POW camp. So that's why you see the tennis court and all that kind of thing. And these images are right here at the Salem Museum. And this was really good because honestly, I bet I had 2 days left on my deadline. And somebody from the library committee here at some sweet lady, I can't remember her name, reached out to me and said, you won't believe, but this weekend, this man brought in images from, because his dad worked at the POW camp. And, if you want to come scan them, we got them. So I came over, and so that made it in just in the nick of time. Here we have a dinner honoring firemen drafted for World War II. Some of them were getting ready to go into service, and so the dinner's there at Firehouse number 1. Here's Roy Rogers with a country western group, local guys, Tommy Magnus and his group at the WDBJ studio in 41. Yeah. And then I'll end with a few kind of print ads. Here, the drive-in's open, and the first one to open was the Lehigh Drive-In Theater out on Lee Highway. So that was the ad that was there. In the 40s, the first 3 were Lehigh, North 11, and the Dixie. Now, some more came along in the 50s. Boxing, Joe Louis comes and does a 4-round bout with Bob Garner. Again, you can see that's the old American Legion Auditorium. Here we have Dizzy Gillespie coming in on Thanksgiving. Now, I always point this out. He's going to do a show and dance. white spectators $1.25. Whenever a black entertainer came to town to do a show and dance, the dance floor, the main floor, was blacks only. And whites were relegated to, this was typically at the American Legion, to the balcony. They could watch, but they couldn't be on the floor. When a white entertainer came, say Tommy Dorsey, for example, you'd see the flip. And so the floor show, the dance floor, and the main seats were all for the whites, and black spectators were then to the balcony. So that was standard in almost every ad. Being Social Club brought Louis Armstrong to town, and again, same thing. He's doing a show and dance. So you see the prices for, it's called colored, for black patrons, but whites are in the balcony, so they're spectators, and so they pay a little less. Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie. And here's just one of the ads, like when the Grand Ole Opry show would come through on a Wednesday night, playing at the Roanoke Theater. Eddie Arnold. And with two images, following World War II, there was a lot of discussion. Okay, how do we memorialize our men that didn't come back? And the Roanoke Valley had a significant. In fact, there's an appendix in the book listing everybody that lost their lives in World War II from the Roanoke Valley. So there were two proposals that came out pretty quick. The Roanoke Women's Club decided that this tower, this architectural rendering, this tower should go up on Mill Mountain. And the place that they had proposed for it was where the Mill Mountain Star is today. So this was 1945, and their idea was that have a tower, light on top, and an observation deck, and then we'd have historic artifacts and war trophies on the bottom level, and then a listing of all the men from all the wars that had ever lost their lives in military service and combat in the Roanoke Valley. And so this was their proposal. City Council kind of liked it and thought, it had merit, this stone edifice. But there were so many suggestions coming forward, they formed a War Memorial Committee to kind of sift through all of them. This happened to be the first big one out of the gate. And then the one that they went with ultimately was this for Elmwood Park. So here is the library, which had already been financed. So that was already taken care of. So we checked that box. As you know, the Roanoke Main Library looks nothing like this today. They abandoned this design, but the library footprint is still there. They used the same architect from a firm that had designed the Jefferson Memorial in DC. So very something similar here was to be in the middle of the park. It was to have a 43-foot circumference lighted globe in the middle that would illuminate all the major battlefields during World War II, and then lining the perimeter would be the name of all of the Roanoke Valley's war dead from all the wars, World War I, II, etc. And then this was going to be an auditorium for performances and cultural events and that kind of thing. Well, City Council actually adopted this as the war memorial for the city of Roanoke, but they had one caveat. Public dollars were already designated for the library. So they told the War Memorial Committee, you raise the funds for these two. And when you do that, we'll go forward. And ultimately, the fundraising campaign fell short. There was some pushback. Folks thought Elmwood Park was too small for this design, and so on and so forth. A lot of different things that kind of entered into that. So this, obviously did not happen. So sometimes I put in the book like what didn't happen, just because it's kind of interesting to think what it would be. So if the tower had gotten built, we wouldn't have the star today, in all likelihood. And so this is kind of interesting. Salem had Longwood Park had a huge design, something kind of similar for this that never materialized, but the same kind of thing. Everybody was kind of rushing into how can we do a war memorial, and that kind of thing. So that is just a little kind of skim through of the Roanoke Valley in the 1940s with some cool images and just some highlights of things that were going on in the Roanoke Valley during that particular decade. So there you have it. So I hope you enjoy it. And I will say, Fran, just for a point of personal privilege, two very special people are here tonight. Not that all of you aren't special. Give me. My wife, Kathy, joined me tonight. She said, well, I've never heard you do this presentation before. So she came tonight. And I've got my 8th grade history teacher, Sam Hartman, is here tonight. So Sam, it's good to see you, my man. See what you started. You see what you got started. So anyway, well, it's good to have both of them. So, yes. However, it was a little bit more targeted. It was a little bit more intense for the Japanese because there were a lot of people from German descent in the Roanoke area. And in fact, there was the German club, which actually had nothing to do with Germany, that would hold Germans, which was a dance. There was a dance club. And they toyed with, do we change our name? Do we, but if you were of Japanese descent, that was a much more scrutinized, intense effort. And so the police chief would give periodic reports that would appear in the paper to public officials about, we've questioned X amount of people and we've confiscated X amount of weapons and that kind of thing, and they had to register and all of that kind of thing. But it was really more for people of Asian descent than it was from. It's a great question from German descent.
Any other questions in the room? Do we have any questions in the chat?
I don't see any.
Well, you were thorough.
I was thorough. Thank you, Frank.
Have just a little token.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
So we do appreciate you so
Thank
much.
you.
So you've got books and we've got books and you've got.
We got, if you want, we do have some downstairs for sale. Now here's a great deal tonight. Actually, for all of them that are here for sale.